All right. Gaza war, and I'll tell you why I said it like that a little bit later. Day 397 and Lebanon War, day 51. You guys, in the last sit rep, I did a breakdown of a deceptive pro-Israel military analysis video, not identifying who it was, and everybody guessed who it was, which was pretty funny. Anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge you guys are a sharp, razor sharp bunch. And so whenever I criticize someone without naming who they are, you guys inevitably figure out who it is. And I'm gonna do that today, maybe. Maybe I'll just tell you who it is. I don't know. We'll see. Uh, but let's talk about Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. He gave a speech today, and it was a very analytical speech. And so it's a good opportunity to go through the analysis that Hezbollah is working on, because it's very clear that as the Secretary General who's putting these public speeches out, this is how we can understand how they understand the war, where they're at. This is their sit rep. They're explaining where they're at, how they understand how they got there and where they're headed. So Naim Qassem, his analysis was very succinctly put in a law of threes. He said, the enemy, the Israelis, have three things that they use against us, and we have three things going for us. So he said each side has three things going for them. So the Israelis' three things are the brutality of their attacks, the depravity of what they're doing, their attacks on civilians, their genocidality. He used lots of examples about it, but basically their intensity of their campaign against civilians. Two, their air force and their air superiority and their weaponry and their ability to bomb from the air. And three, their huge number of army men, 65,000, 70,000, maybe 100,000 men that are on the border. There are five divisions that are on the border with Lebanon. Those are their three things. And against that, he says, Hezbollah has three things. They have the ideological commitment, which comes from their religious commitment as well, and their spiritual commitment to Islam. That's the first thing. Their second thing is basically their courage. He talked about it in terms of their readiness to face martyrdom. And he talked a lot about nuance. He said, this doesn't mean people are trying to kill themselves. They don't come out and try to kill themselves. No, when they fight, they try to inflict damage on the enemy. They try to return safely to their bases to fight another day, but they hope that when they die on the battlefield and not, as many of the martyrs have said, they don't want to die in their beds. They don't want to die in safety while this war continues, right? They want to meet their end on the battlefield, in battle with their comrades, fighting for what they believe in. So that's two. And then three is all of the preparation, all of the training, and everything that they've done to prepare for the war. Then he breaks down these things on both sides. So in terms of Israel, he says the only thing that they really have going, even though they have these three things going, the only one that really counts for them is the Air Force. He basically acknowledges the Air Force and the air superiority they really do have. There's no way around this. As far as their genocide and their ability to commit these seemingly unlimited ability to commit these acts of depravity, he says this is eroding them long term, their standing and their long-term viability. And there's an interesting thing that he said, which is he kind of expressed this almost pleasant surprise where he says, even in America, there are protests now against what Israel's doing. So he doesn't expect there to be protests in America, but he's he expresses this kind of pleasant surprise that there are protests even in America. So if there are protests even in America, and there are protests all over the world, and Israel has lost all of this standing through this absolutely disgusting things that they've done over the past year, then that really isn't leading them to any kind of victory. The Air Force, as I said, is a real asset. But then the third thing, their army numbers. And he makes a big point of saying that despite all of their troops on the border, they seem to be also kind of unable to decide to advance. They go, they blow things up, and they retreat. They retreat under fire as they're mustering. As I've said many times before, they come under fire, rocket fire, pretty accurate mortar fire at their gathering points, rocket barrages. And then when they enter the towns of the border, they are confronted with Hezbollah fighters and these kind of infantry battles. Their tanks get blown up by anti-tank guided missiles, and then the battles are zero distance battles, infantry battles inside of the ruins of these villages where they take casualties. And he estimated 45 tanks destroyed and 1,000 between killed and wounded, he said, but he noted that the Israelis don't actually tell the truth about how many people they're losing. So he says they are inflicting pain on us, but they are in pain too. And here again, there's a real kind of realism in what Naim Qassem is saying. He says, we are in more pain than they are. That's true, but that's how it always is. He says the oppressed always have more pain than their oppressors in this kind of war. He says they have better weapons than us. That's how it always is. He said, never in history have the oppressed had better weapons than their oppressor. I think that's a really, really simple, clear, and obvious point that it's easy to forget when you're dealing with when you're thinking about watching a formidable organization like Hezbollah, and you might forget that this is a huge disparity. They do not have what Israel has. Israel has everything America has, and America is this country of 300 million people and all the accumulated Western advantages of the entire West behind them. And Lebanon is a guerrilla group. Hezbollah is a guerrilla group based in a country of 4 million people that is completely exposed and had to grow its forces under total surveillance, total transparency in the face of a hostile, often very hostile government. And they have allies. They have allies that are powerful. But even if you add up all their most powerful allies, of which Iran being the main one, Iran has less industrial population, etc. All of those indices of power, Iran has less than America. So it is a disparity. Can the weaker party win a war? Oh, yeah, absolutely they can. Wars of liberation are always, when they're won, are won by the weaker party. So it's not insurmountable, and it has not been historically insurmountable that there is a disparity, but it does not behoove us to forget that there is a disparity. And Naim Qassem was reminding his audience of this disparity. He also called on the Lebanese army and the Lebanese authority to clarify what happened in Batroun. I mentioned in the previous sit rep that the Israelis went into this town way up north along the coast in Lebanon and kidnapped a sea captain, a low ranking, not low ranking, but like a young guy. A young guy with nothing to do with Hezbollah or anything, just a captain still in school. And he said, Naim Qassem said, this is a huge affront to Lebanese sovereignty, and he wants Lebanon to say what happened there. He said, even if you're just admitting that you didn't have the power to stop it, the country deserves to know what happened. And he said you should also ask Germany to clarify what happened. And the UNIFIL Navy that Germany was apparently the forces that were supposed to be patrolling the ones that let the Israelis in were these German United Nations soldiers. So, I mean, should Germany be allowed to be in the United Nations? Should they be allowed to keep the peace somewhere? It seems pretty preposterous given Germany's behavior and Germany's history that they would be desirable peacekeepers anywhere in the world. Certainly not in Israel, where you're supposed to have some kind of even-handedness as the United Nations. And obviously, Germany is all in for the Israeli genocide, as they always are with any genocide. So if there's a genocide, you should not have Germans trying to be in between the two parties, as Germany will reliably take the side of the genocider in any conflict where genocide is happening. So, I mean, that's the United Nations problem to solve, and the United Nations can't solve any problems at all. They couldn't solve their way out of a paper bag. So it's not going to happen. Germany will not be removed from UNIFIL, and UNIFIL will continue to do whatever presumably Israel wants, with the noble exceptions of the soldiers, like the Irish soldiers who refuse to leave and who insist on following their mandate, even when the real powers don't want them to and are threatening them with death for doing exactly what they're supposed to. So that's Germany and that's the United Nations. And when you put those two things together, you get Israel kidnapping a captain from a coastal town and nobody seemingly even seeing it, maybe. Naim Qassem also said that the US elections have no value for us. And since Naim Qassem said that, we should probably also quote from the vice president of the media authority of Yemen, Nasser al-Din Amr. And he said to the new president, we say, welcome, whoever it is. Our armed forces will greet you with iron and fire, and our people will greet you with million-man marches that curse you and America. So pretty, in terms of what the axis of resistance thinks of the US election, that's roughly the tone of it. You, I'm sure, have plenty to consume about the US elections. You didn't come here for that. And so I won't be taking up your time. I will take up some of your time at the end, maybe, time permitting. But don't assign my thoughts much credibility. I am absolutely not steeped in these things the way many of you have no choice but to be. And you have my sympathies for the fact that you are forced to be engaged with it. Okay. Naim Qassem. He also said that Israel's goals are to destroy Hezbollah, of course. They've said that many times. They want to occupy Lebanon, like as if it's the West Bank. And he said these are the things that they want, and you he's like, that's not gonna happen. And he also reiterated this thing that I think Nasrallah started. Nasrallah being Naim Qassem's predecessor in this role as Secretary General of Hezbollah. He said the era of defeats is over and the era of victories has begun. So that's one of their taglines that you'll hear them say over and over again. Okay, the other thing that I'm always waiting for now since the Lebanon War started is these summaries. They're basically summaries from the operations room. And these summaries that Hezbollah does from the operations room, they're not just kind of field reports. This is more like an analysis of, again, it's a little bit like a sit rep. It's an analysis of what's been happening, and that gives you their sense of where they're at. So the operations room report for today talked about divided into ground engagements and the high bar series of operations. So two types of reporting. So the ground engagements, they talked about Khiam. Starting on October 28th, large numbers of Israeli troops and equipment began advancing towards the town of Khiam under heavy aerial cover over the surrounding areas and stationed in frontline positions in Tal Nahas, Hamames, and the Al Majidiyah plain according to preset defensive plans, and after closely monitoring potential routes of advancement, Islamic resistance fighters executed a fire-based defense plan focused on synchronized targeted missile and artillery strikes against enemy movements and positions. So a fire-based plan, which means they're not necessarily trying to get close. It's not like an infantry plan where you're trying to get up to point blank range, close with, and destroy the enemy, so to speak. It's a fire-based defense plan, missile and artillery strikes. You're monitoring them from far away, but you're going to destroy them, but from standoff distance. Over a period of 3 continuous days, more than 70 targeting operations were conducted, 50 of them around the town's southern and eastern edges, resulting in the destruction of 4 tanks with guided missiles and the killing and wounding of their crews. Additionally, a soldier position in Metula settlement was hit by a guided missile, resulting in deaths and injuries among them. A security team in Tal Nahas was also targeted with a guided missile. One of the most notable operations involved a precision missile barrage targeting large gatherings of enemy troops and vehicles in Wadi al-Asafir, southeast of the town, using qualitative precision missiles with 250 kilo warheads filled with high explosive materials. Powerful explosions and casualty numbers created panic and confusion within enemy ranks. So this is a strategy. Well, I should say this is a tactic that Hezbollah has been using, which is this idea of a fire-based defense. So they are targeting with artillery, mortars, and missiles and drones gatherings of Israeli soldiers, whether it's on the Israeli side of the border, the occupied Palestine side of the border, or inside Lebanon in these towns they try to take. So it's not just if they're inside Lebanon, but also they'll attack in the enemy rear areas. So targeting attack support forces around Khiam, Metula, they said 11 concentrated missile barrages, 23 rocket barrages on training camps, missile launch bases and command centers in Ayelet HaShahar, yet rocket launch bases in Yesod HaMa'ala, armored gathering area in Sha'al, command centers in Shamir. So they're making it very difficult for the Israelis to gather, to muster, to get themselves organized. By the night of Thursday, the 31st of October, enemy forces were forced to withdraw behind the borders, utilizing military helicopters to evacuate their dead and wounded, as well as specialized equipment to retrieve the destroyed tanks. So this was a 28, 29, 30, 31st, 4-day operation the Israelis were trying to do in Khiam, a big one, and basically they were repelled after 4 days. Saturday here's a news story on Saturday, which would be the 2nd of November. During an attempt by an Israeli force to advance across the border towards the village of Hula, our fighters spotted a convoy of 40 military vehicles, tanks, armored vehicles, and personnel carriers led by 2 bulldozers. As the force reached the range of our fighters, the bulldozers were struck by 2 Kornet anti-tank missiles, destroying them and killing and injuring those inside. Under heavy Israeli artillery cover, the entire convoy retreated to the eastern border of the town. As the convoy regrouped, 3 successive rocket salvos spaced 5 minutes apart with over 60 rockets struck the area. Due to the repeated and intense strikes by the resistance, the Israeli forces have been unable to establish or stabilize their positions in the frontline villages, prompting them to withdraw from several towns they had advanced towards, retreating beyond the border. So, ongoing engagements address repeated attempts by Israeli forces to besiege Nakura in the western sector, and a foiled infiltration attempt in the Wazani area in the eastern sector was met with a rocket barrage. So that's kind of the situation on the border. Now, the other thing you see on the border is the Israelis love these to provide these aerial photos where they go in, they rig up the whole town to blow up, and then they blow up the town. They blow up a whole town or a whole village or a whole string of houses, the same kinds of things they do in Gaza. Now, if they're going in and they're blowing up the town, I mean, somebody said this. I don't know if it was Naim Qassem, but somebody said that the town is the kind of thing, and even some tunnels, maybe these are the kinds of things you can give up if you're Hezbollah, right? You don't need to fight over buildings that the Israelis are going to have three or four different ways of blowing up. They want to come in and blow up a tunnel, or they want to come in and blow up a bunch of people's houses. You might not want to spend lives stopping them. Rather, let them do it and focus on ambushes where the ground is more favorable, the timing is more favorable, where you have what you need, etc. So these victories that the Israelis are showing of going in and wiring up explosives to blow up civilian buildings, it's I don't know. It's not a it doesn't impress. I don't think it's the kind of thing that impresses Hezbollah or makes them feel like the Israelis are winning. So then there's the Khaybar series of operations, which is a reference to some historic battle. I don't know much about this history. One day I will look into this history. I think it's Islamic history and lore, and I know a lot of you know a lot about it, and maybe some of you will talk about it. But I don't need you to. If you feel like it, by all means, go ahead. I do plan to look into this at some point, but as you can imagine, there's other things that are more urgent right now. So the Khaybar series of operations. Despite intensive intelligence surveillance and constant activity by the Israeli Air Force, the resistance has escalated its qualitative operations by conducting strategic and calculated precise and calculated strikes on strategic and security centers, facilities, and bases reaching 145 kilometers inside occupied Palestine using missiles and drones. So that's what they're calling the Khaybar series of operations. So this is how they want to try to prevent the Israeli military from kind of stalemating the conflict by just parking their soldiers on the border and bombing once in a while. So that would be sustainable for Israel, maybe, if they're not taking too many casualties. They don't go in to try to fight Hezbollah. They stay on their side of the border and then they bomb. Maybe they sneak in and wire up a series of houses to blow up. But they're also bombing the depth. They're bombing the suburbs of Beirut. They're bombing. They're kidnapping. They're doing this and that. So they're kind of torturing Lebanon over a long period of time. Same with Gaza, right? So the way to try to prevent that from that kind of unfavorable stalemate, the resistance is using their rockets, missiles, drones, etc., to attack strategic sites inside Israel so that they have an answer to Israel's aerial bombardment. So they say 56 of the 56 operations have been executed since October 1st, 2024, with 18 occurring in the past week alone, displacing 2 million settlers across an area of 5,000 square kilometers have been forced. Oh, no, not displacing, but they've been forced repeatedly to enter shelters, suspend schools, business, and air traffic. So here's what they conclude. The Khaybar escalations follow a clear strategy. Settlers who have been warned to evacuate their settlements should not return because they're now military targets. The only achievement by the Israeli army is the destruction of civilian homes, infrastructure, and the leveling of agricultural lands in border towns. Recent weeks have proven that resistance formations have been able to structurally reorganize its units at all levels. Our fighters on the front lines along the southern border have forced Israeli forces to remain confined to the borders of the frontline villages, preventing their advance toward the second line of villages so far. I've said many times, if they do advance, that doesn't mean that Hezbollah is losing. However, it is notable that they have not advanced so far. Could they be planning a big deception? You know, maybe they're planning a big deception. They're gonna lull Hezbollah into a false sense of security and then do a big attack and make a breakthrough. I don't know, maybe, but how are they going to do it? They can only use some variation. I've said this before of the methods they've used so far. If they do, if they do a big attack with, if they commit all their forces to a big attack, they will take really big casualties, and then they'll be occupying southern Lebanon and facing a new phase of guerrilla warfare. So this is what they're contemplating as they sit on the border and blow up civilian houses and experience rocket attacks on their gatherings of soldiers. You probably saw the unveiling of the Fateh 110 missile with a 500 kilogram payload that hit not an airport, but somewhere near the Israeli airport. Now Israel apparently tonight is bombing Lebanon near their airport. So getting closer to that kind of combat, or like the mutual destruction of each other's airports, which who knows, maybe that will happen. I don't know. You probably also heard that Netanyahu fired the defense minister, Gallant. You may have heard that there's a whole series of abuses now that are taking place in women's prisons. So the Israelis capture all these women, civilians, take them to prison, and then violate their religious sensibilities. So that's just Israel trying to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from uh, Israel proper, as they say, or 1948 Palestine, through a new law. They're going to try to expel those Palestinians too. And these are new lows that Israel is reaching, and there will be more lows. Israel will continue to get to new lows. Okay. Um, US elections happened, and I don't have, I don't believe I have very much of interest to add to every angle that this has been studied, and every angle, every possible view that people have taken up, every take, every hot take. There is something that I will say, which is I do think that Gaza was a major reason that Harris lost. And I've seen people arguing that that's not the case and that most Americans don't care and so on. And I guess the mechanism by which I think Gaza cost Harris the election is something like the following. Because it wasn't Stein. Stein didn't get many votes, and that could be, I'm not sure why that is either. Maybe some of you have theories, but Stein, maybe I've heard somebody told me that it was maybe that the Green Party is not all that well organized or funded. It doesn't have great ground game, as they call it. It could be tactical voting is a legitimate thing. Maybe people didn't want to throw their vote away, being constantly berated by saying a vote for Stein is a vote for Trump. And people maybe the people inclined to vote for Stein because of her politics chose not to because of that. They were convinced by that argument, maybe American voters or tactical voters. But here's the reason I think it was an issue, even though the anti-genocide candidate didn't really pick up any significant amount of votes from the electorate. The thing is, the Democrats chose to not stop the genocide. And they chose to run on the genocide continues and the genocide is going to continue no matter what. So you might as well vote for us on other things. And I think what you need for an election is some kind of energy and some kind of sense of direction. And you can't have that if you're running on the genocide is going to continue no matter what. So it's just we're not allowed to talk about this, which I believe is the main central issue of our time. And you're not allowed to talk about it anywhere in the West. You're not allowed to really take a stand on it anywhere in the West. And it's just kind of crazy making to have politicians pivoting to like grocery prices or Pell Grants or healthcare, none of which the Democrats care about, and all of which the Democrats have long since betrayed their constituencies on those too. So I think that the absence of energy and the inability to get people interested in voting has everything to do with the ideological confusion and demoralization caused by the inability to take a stand on the ultimate crime, the ultimate issue, and just kind of blow it off. How can anybody trust you or show any interest in you on any other thing at that point? So that's the main thing I wanted to say. It's like so much information and so much disinformation around this topic that but here I am adding my little drop into this ocean of takes that you all are going to have. Um, Let me say a couple things about Trump. Trump is as bought and paid for by the pro-Israel lobby, and so are every one of his mavericks on his team. They're all these mavericks on his team. They've all kissed the ring. They'll all do it again. Trump is no less of a kisser of the ring than anybody, as you will see. Um, I don't think that I also don't think that he's as random or erratic as people think he is. I think when it counts, he's just as disciplined a member of this club as anybody. And if Democrats want to say he'll be worse, well, he will be worse because every president is worse than the previous president in America. That's the nature of decline and corruption and the stage of history that we're in with the US empire. So the other thing, I guess the last thing in terms of like us, I don't know if people are trying to understand us, like people are trying to understand the anti-genocide people. You know, we all know that Trump is bad. None of us are fans of Trump. I mean, there are some fans of Trump, I think. There are some fans of Trump that are anti-genocide even, possibly. I've seen comments by people like this. I don't fully understand that politics, but assuming that it's real, these are kind of right-wing anti-war people that are pro-Trump. Um, that's not us. Like the left, the anti-genocide left, which I think probably most of you who are watching this are. We are not fans of Trump, but we can't really we can't really find it in our hearts to be upset about Harris losing after committing a genocide for a year. So this is this is kind of where we this is kind of where we can't connect with. people who are upset over this. You know, it's just a connection we can't really make. We can't really meet you there. So that's it. I don't I don't have much more to say about it. I guess I have said a bit more than I thought I would. Okay, the last thing. And this has been going on in the comments section. I haven't deleted it or anything. I've just let it play out. Even though I don't like the tone, guys, I don't like it. But like people who come in here and they say, stop calling it a war. It's a genocide. It's not a war. And I let it pass. But like now that seems to be a real debate point. Um, um, the UN envoy, who I think is great, Francesca Albanese, is exactly my age, it turns out. Um, Francesca Albanese has been making this point. She says, "Don't call it a war. It's not a war. It's a genocide." Norman Finkelstein has been arguing it's not a war. It's a genocide. And you know, these are dedicated people. You know, I can't. I would never question either of their dedication. They've both devoted their lives to this. They're both tremendous, people have said all kinds of horrible things about them. They've suffered a lot, such as it is, for taking these stands. But um they're wrong. They don't get to decide that it's not a war. Um And I know what they're doing. They're kind of doing this legal reasoning, and genocide is a legal concept. It's a legal category, and they have this kind of legal reasoning that they do. Finkelstein and Albanese, but presumably those of you who are in the comment section saying stop calling it a war. And if you're legally minded, fine. You work in terms of definitions and legal concepts. But if you're historically minded, if you're militarily minded, genocide, every genocide that's happened has happened during a war. Um, the Al the Armenian genocide happened during World War One. The German genocides against the Herero and Nama in 1905. These are both things that I've covered in my historical podcast. There are episodes on each of these. The German genocide against the Herero and Nama, the two genocides really, they took place during wars against these groups. There were actually a really clever resistance that was fighting a kind of a cavalry war against the Germans and leading them all over the deserts of present day Namibia and just totally demoralizing them. And the Germans couldn't beat them in the field. What they did was they basically, they kind of sent missionaries to tell the civilians who were hiding in the bush to come out of the bush, and if they came out of the bush, they would help them survive and feed them and stuff. And those are the people that were sent to the concentration camps and death camps that the Germans have been organizing since 1905. Again, never miss a chance to commit a genocide. So the Germans, their genocides, World War II, of course, all the German Holocausts of World War II were in the context of the invasion and occupation of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and the Jews, by the way, the Jews did not go like lambs to the slaughter whatsoever. There's an 800 plus page book that I read I think it was called just Jewish Resistance to the Holocaust or something, or Jewish Armed Resistance to the Holocaust. I'll try to track down that reference. I think it was in my I think I referred to it in my Substack. I did an 8-part series about how Zionism is an anti-Jewish ideology, and one of those one of those installments, I believe, cited this book. Let's guess which one it is. Human Material, Early Zionists Held Jews in Contempt. It's probably Horrible Stereotypes and Imagery. Yeah, the Lambs to the Slaughter issue. I don't think that's it. It was maybe Religious and Secular Tradition. Sorry, I'm just going through it to say I will find it. But anyway, there's more than one important book and a lot of research on how much fighting, how much fighting back, and how much armed resistance there was to the German Holocaust on the Eastern Front by Jewish communist radicals, Soviets, all kinds of Jewish people. There were Jews. There were tons of Jews in the Red Army that were fighting the Nazis. So those were wars during which there were genocides that were committed against the civilian population. The Indian Wars, during which the Americans, the North Americans, and the British before them committed genocide, one genocide after another against the indigenous population of the Americas. They were also wars. There was armed resistance by the indigenous peoples that were fighting back. So I don't know why you want to say it's not a war. I guess the idea is that a war is some kind of the assumption is if it's a war, it's like some kind of symmetry, like because it's a war, there has to be symmetry between the two sides. But there are wars, there are guerrilla wars, there are asymmetric wars, there are wars of liberation, there are wars of occupation, there are wars of conquest, there are colonial wars, there are positional wars, there are wars of maneuver. There are many different kinds of wars. And what has been going on in the region since October 7th, 2023, has been a war between the Palestinian resistance and now the Lebanese resistance and their allies. The Yemen Ansarullah has joined, the Iraqi resistance has joined, Iran and Syria. Well, Iran is actually directly involved in the war in a kind of standoff way with Israel now. And that war has been taking place as Israel has also been committing genocide against first the Palestinians in Gaza, but now increasingly against the Lebanese, the Palestinians in the West Bank. They are happening at the same time. The Israelis are committing genocide against the civilians of Gaza, and they are fighting an armed resistance with their armed forces. And I I heard, people have been sending me this thing that Finkelstein's debating Elijah Magnier, and it's like I'm not gonna watch that, you guys. I don't think you should watch that either. I don't know. I don't know why you would. It seems like Finkelstein's trying to say the resistance is losing and the resistance is insignificant. And I don't even know what the point of that argument is. What's the point of it? It's speculation anyway. You want to speculate that they're losing? You want to present evidence that they're losing? Like that's what I don't know. That's what Israel is doing. That's what Israel is trying to accomplish. It's trying to accomplish making everyone feel like Israel is invincible and unstoppable, and the West is invincible and nobody can ever beat them. And Finkelstein repeatedly says things like, I'm not a military person. I don't understand military. He doesn't understand military affairs. He doesn't understand strategy. He doesn't understand the third world. He looks to Western sources. He understands scholarship. He understands sources. He does this kind of legal and moral reasoning pretty well. His manner and style and delivery are, he's very earnest. They make for great moments. Nobody can deny those moments. Watching him yell at college at a college student at the University of Waterloo is something we've all done many times. Um, but like even when he does this, even when he does this kind of scholarship, he says, I've read everything Gandhi ever wrote. And he wrote this book called What Gandhi Says. And I read the book, and it's like very clear that this is written by somebody who doesn't understand Indian history, doesn't understand any of the other players around Gandhi, any of the context in which Gandhi was writing these things, why he was writing them, what was going on in domestic Indian politics, resistance Indian politics, the nonviolence debate, who the violence debate, who he was debating. Finkelstein doesn't understand any of that. And he doesn't really care because he's just setting out to read and summarize what Gandhi wrote, what Gandhi says. If you listen to Finkelstein talk about Maoism, he says, I was a Maoist. And then he says, I studied with some of the great Maoists. And then you think he's going to say, like, what, like Zhou Enlai, Mao Zedong, Lin Biao, or, no, he's talking about French intellectuals. That's who he thinks the great Maoists are. So what I'm saying is, this is not somebody you should be following on military affairs. He's tried to tell you this, but I don't think he can help himself. He also, he feels these things. He thinks these things and he says them. That's what he does. He always tells his truth. That's why people like him. But I I I wouldn't I don't think of him as somebody you should follow about who's who's winning this war or whether it is in fact a war or not. Um, so yes. So please, um, uh, don't 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 tell me not to call it a war. Okay, it is a war. It's a war. It's a war characterized by tremendous disparity. Um, Never in the history of wars have the oppressed had firepower to match their oppressors. Okay, as Naim Qassem said, all guerrilla wars are characterized by shocking disparities in terms of the suffering, in terms of the pain. And Israel is the most depraved force the world has ever seen. And it is distributed beautifully through the West. The elites of the whole West are part of this project, and it's nobody fighting this can should underestimate it, but nobody is. Nobody is. So that nobody needs to hear what Finkelstein is saying today. That nobody here thinks maybe he did. I think maybe he did. I think maybe he's working out his own disillusionment, but nobody here needs a stark reminder that Israel and America have more firepower than the guerrilla armies that are trying to free Palestine. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that. Um, I think I'll stop there. I think that you should like and subscribe. I um yeah, I will continue to call it I will continue to call it the Gaza War uh and the Lebanon War. Although I do admit that there are better potential names for it, but this is what we have. And we're gonna keep calling it that, and we're gonna keep using the number of days that have passed in the war as long as there is no end in sight, which I usually say at the beginning of these things, but now here I am saying it at the end. All right. You guys hang in there, and we'll see you in the next one.